All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. My name's Jason Hibbets. I'm a community evangelist at Red Hat, basically in charge of running our opensource.com project, and lately have been retasked with helping to build community around Jim Whitehurst's new book, The Open Organization. So if you have ideas, I'm all open, and would really just as a new adventure for me, so we're interested to see where that takes us, building community around a book and around the concepts in the book. So just a few notes here. You'll notice on the top of my slides I have some social media, so if you hear something you like or have some questions, feel free to tweet at me. My handle is @jhibbets. And if you're not following Open Source Way already, it's a great stream of open source goodness, both on Twitter, Facebook, and Google+. So I'll talk a little bit about our strategy during the talk today, and then obviously the event hashtags we have up there. I would prefer to take most of the questions at the end, but I will stop about halfway through to see if there are any questions, and we can do any sort of course correction with that. So what I want to talk about today is building community around great content. And in marketing speak, that's basically content marketing. But since we're open source, it's really about building community. And I'm going to talk you through, introduce you to my team, talk about the methodologies that I use to manage my team, the strategies we use on opensource.com, some of the programs that we use, programming and tooling, and then we'll look at some of the results that we measure and look forward to. The reason why opensource.com exists is because Red Hat wanted to have a platform to talk about open source, a thought leadership platform to talk about how the principles of open source can be applied outside the world of technology. So we still talk about technology, but we have these kind of loftier aspirations to talk about how open source should be applied to government or education or business. And so we started building this community in January of 2010, so we're about 5.5 years into it. And before that, opensource.com simply just redirected to redhat.com. So we weren't really getting a lot of value out of that. And as we were kind of determining like what we wanted to do, we said we want to build this community, and we figured out that we actually had this domain name, and what a great place to do that at. So today, basically, I want to share the tools and techniques that my team uses so that you can take some of these ideas back to your organizations and hopefully make some improvements along the way. So I often describe opensource.com as an online community and publication highlighting how open source is changing the world. And when we first started out, we were publishing about 1 article a day, so 5 articles a week. We are now publishing over 20 articles a week, and the majority of the content is actually coming from the open source community, meaning that someone that does not have a redhat.com email address is contributing that content to the platform and to the community. We generate over 600,000 page views a month. So we have quite an audience, and it's growing. I think this month we are on pace to have another record month. We're looking at probably 640,000 page views. But don't jinx me on that, so I don't want to, hopefully we won't jinx that. So really, Red Hat's mission is to be the catalyst in open source communities. And our mission that we like to talk about is to build the world's premier open source storytelling platform. We do that by collecting stories from all over the world, from all sorts of different open source communities. And my team provides the editorial services behind that. And so what that means is if you have a story about your open source community, that my team would like to help you get that on opensource.com. And we do this kind of in 2 ways, and I'll get more into this around the strategy. But we have kind of our newsy type content. So we have content that's being published on a daily basis. It's not like breaking news. There's a whole bunch of other websites that do that for the open source community and for the technology industry. And then we also create different resources. So I'll talk a lot about our What is Open Source page and how that was created and why we think that's important to have. An example of one of our success stories is a community called BiCode, B-I-I Code. They're basically a dependency management project. And we published an article about their project in January of this year. And the article basically centered around they were going to open source their code once they hit 10,000 users. Well, after we published the article, they had a really steady increase in user adoption. So their investors decided to open source the code sooner because they saw this opportunity. Now, I can't guarantee this for every single project, but this is a great story of we were able to shed some light on a cool project, and they were able to see some success because of the storytelling. So I want to briefly, before I get into the nuts and bolts of everything, talk a little bit about the open source model of participation. And I'm sure most people in the room are very familiar with this. But I'd like to talk a lot about, we talk a lot about these principles of transparency and collaboration, participation, rapid prototyping, meritocracy, and I love to talk about passion because I think that's what really drives a lot of the communities. We start with this kind of cliche term of scratching our own itch. And once we find other people, that's when communities can get really strong. So when we show this passion, it really shines through in our communities. And so why is open source a better way? With transparency, it creates accountability. If your name is attached to a feature or a bug report, you probably will feel a little bit of peer pressure and hopefully some accountability to get that done. With rapid prototyping, it allows us to fail faster. And we have a mantra at Red Hat where we like to fail faster so that we can learn quicker so that we can innovate quickly as well. And then, of course, I talk about passion already, but meritocracy, in the coding world, this is the best code wins. Right? You could be a senior developer or you could be a junior developer, and if your code is superior to that of a senior developer, your code should win out in the open source way. But in reality, for us, to take it out of the coding example, is the best ideas win, right? And the best ideas can come from everywhere. And you'll hear a lot about this when we talk about diversity and inclusivity, that we need to be more inclusive so that we can get these ideas from different cultures and different walks of life. So when you put all these terms together, we call this the open source way. Taking the pillars and the tenets of the open source development model, applying it to other disciplines outside of technology. Again, things like business, education, and government. So I want to introduce you to my team. In the picture with the blue background, we have in front of me is Jen White-Huger. She's our content editor. Her role basically is to be in charge of our content strategy, and she basically touches every piece of content that gets published on the site. Next to her is Alex Sanchez. Alex is our social media person. He is scheduling tweets and Facebook updates, Google Plus updates, and also is in charge of a lot of our other syndication, which I'll talk more about as well. And then we have Ricky Ensley. Ricky came on board earlier this year and has really helped me on the more of the community management side and is also managing a lot of our column content. And I'll talk more about that in our strategy. And then we have Jason Baker, who is our resident OpenStack expert and also helps us manage our resource pages and strategy. And then there's actually another person here in the visor between Jen and Baker. This is Brian Berenshausen. He's our perpetual intern. He comes back every May and just kind of does whatever we want. So we're really happy to have him. And he just put together our annual summer reading list. And so that's always a huge task. We just published that this week. It always does well on the site. So we've got a bunch of books for you to read over the summer. So this is the team. We pull off 600,000 pages a month with the help of our community moderators and our community. And we operate like a well-oiled machine. And I often like to think that we operate like a startup within Red Hat. And so we're going to get into the methodologies and some of the strategies we use. So when I hire people, I use I have a couple of things that I like to check off, right? So first and foremost, we hire for skill set, right? We make sure that the person can do the job. But that's not our priority. There's two other things that I like to look for. One is a culture fit. I want to make sure that they're going to be a good fit for Red Hat culture because we do have a very unique culture and just want to make sure they're going to thrive in our type of environment. The other thing is I like to make sure that they have an entrepreneurial spirit. So one of my favorite interview questions to ask is if you had unlimited amount of money, what business would you start? And what would you do with it? Just to see if they're thinking about that and also to see if they have the passion, if they have a passion for something and they're willing to talk about it. So the first thing I'll talk about is lean methodology. And if you haven't read the book, The Lean Startup by Eric Ries, I highly recommend you add it to your reading list. Without kind of giving away the entire book, he talks a lot about decision making and feedback loops. And really what he boils it down to is to create something called the minimum viable product. So in a product world, it's getting something in front of customers or potential customers as like the least common denominator, like something that they can react to and give you feedback on. Like this is very familiar to us in the open source world, right? Because we are like doing the release early, release often thing all the time. But the key part of that MVP system is to actually have, when you do the feedback, have a way to measure that success, right? So if you do something, know what success looks like so that you can make a decision to either continue that or to kill it, right? In the startup world, they call that pivoting. So I'm going to give a couple examples that we did on opensource.com. This is our community calendar as it exists today, but the first version of our community calendar was a static HTML page. So instead of investing a whole bunch of time and resources in developing a more robust calendar system, our initial MVP was, let's throw a static page up with a couple of events and see if we can get the community to contribute 30 events within a month. So we blew that metric out of the water. I think we had like 50 events from our community. And when we saw that there was interest in it, we decided to invest in a more robust system, forms that you can submit a form. It's a little bit more automated, and it just works out well for everyone. The other example I'll talk about is our weekly top 5 YouTube video that we do. We were looking at a way to highlight some of the best content on the site via a different medium. And so Jen had this idea of like, well, why don't we do like a 3-minute YouTube video every Friday? And so we did. And our goal was, could we get 200 YouTube clicks on that video? And so for the first 3 weeks, we hit those goals. And so we've continued this on today. We continue to improve on this process, right? We've gotten more efficient at creating the video. We are doing, instead of Jen just kind of being on the camera, we're trying to involve other people on the team to give it a little bit more collaborative feel and a little bit more conversation. And this continues to do really well. So we, again, just an example of if you're going to try something, know what success looks like and then continue to improve on it. The other thing I'll talk about is a results-only work environment. In the extreme version of this, if you've heard about the Best Buy stories about this a couple years ago, they basically said, look, we're going to give you some goals as an employee, and we don't care where you are, how you do it, what you do, as long as you meet the goals, right? So this was like, you don't have to be in the office, from 9 to 5. And so I think they've since kind of moved back away from that. But the extreme version of is, here's your goals, go get them done. Talk to me in 60 days when they're done, that kind of situation. So we actually take that methodology and pair it with a 30, 60, 90 goal setting. And what that allows us to do is to escape some of our daily, what we call the whirlwind, right? It's email and social media and everything that you kind of like, that distracts you from getting real work done. And we actually map out every 30, 60, 90 days what we want to accomplish kind of on a larger scale, right? So this is doing something like, we have our annual reader survey that we like to get out in April. So getting that on the calendar, making sure that we are prepared for that so we can get that done. So I've got a couple other examples. Our team does a work from home on Wednesdays. And so it's not kind of this, it's not mandatory, but it's more of the ideology of, I want everyone to have a meeting-free day in their work week so that they can actually work on some of this stuff and have a block of time, right? And every day, like in my schedule, I have a lot of meetings. So if I have a meeting at 9 and a meeting at 11, I'm not going to really get a lot done at 10 o'clock, right? So I need like a big chunk of time, preferably 2 or more hours, to actually work on real stuff. And then the other example that I want to talk about is like one of my 30-60-90 goals last year was to upgrade our Drupal platform from Drupal 6 to Drupal 7. And so we had this on our 30-60-90 so that we had incremental check-ins during this. And actually how we do this, we actually have a weekly meeting. So we check in every week on our 30-60-90 goals and talk about who's working on what and if there are delays on anything and so forth. So that seems to work really well for our team to get some of those larger tasks completed. So that's a little bit of the methodology. Again, we're going to talk about some of the strategy. And again, this is more about, this is how we do things, and I want you to see how we do it so that you can take these ideas back with you. And you'll see that part of this is kind of our daily grind, but and hopefully you'll see how it fits into kind of what we need to do for an everyday life as a publisher. So this is an example of our daily heartbeat. Don't know if you can see the exact details on it, but this is an email that we send out every day about what happened on the site yesterday. We list the articles that were published, the page views that they have, and then some key metrics that we're looking at. Total number of page views, referral traffic, where that referral traffic is coming from. This just kind of gives us a health indication of what's happening on the site. And I'll actually share an example later on of kind of like where this comes into play. And oftentimes we'll actually forward this to our contributors, right? So if we had a guest contributor, we'll send them the stats and say, hey, look, your article is doing great, it's doing average, or it's doing awesome. Please continue to promote it. So being in the publishing industry, we know that content is king. If you are publishing anything, content is your crown jewel. So we have a couple different methodologies that we use in order to actually acquire the content. One, we have certain topics that we like to talk about all the time. Things like Linux and Docker, or insert hot topic of the open source week. And then we have weekly columns. So every Friday we have the top 5 video I told you about. We also have a news roundup. So every Friday, some of our community moderators publish, here's the latest things happening in the open source world. And then every Monday we have an OpenStack news roundup. So having some consistent things there every week for our readers is important. We also do themed content weeks. So we will do something like Women in Open Source or Back to School with Open Source. And we plan these out over the course of the month. And I'll actually show you our editorial calendar here in a moment. We also have our resource pages. These are more evergreen types of pieces of content. This is our What is Open Source page. This is our What is Open Education page. And I'll talk more about those shortly. So we're getting a lot better at planning ahead, just because of things like 30, 60, 90 that help us chip away at some of these larger tasks. So the example on your left is our editorial calendar. These are our themed content weeks that we're doing. So we will let our community know what content we're interested in, what the deadline is, and this is actually a great way for us to acquire new authors and new contributors to the site. On the other side is our recurring columns. So we've partnered with folks like the Apache Foundation to get updates from various Apache projects. We have folks like Jono Bacon, who is the former community manager at Canonical, who's now at XPRIZE, has a column called 6 Degrees where he's talking about open source communities. And then things like Humanitarian FOSS and Open Content Management Systems and Easy DevOps. So DevOps is a hot term that everyone's talking about. We're trying to get kind of some of the more practical ways that people are implementing DevOps in their organizations. So with the columns, this was a really interesting thing. All of our writers are volunteers, and we don't pay for any of our contributions. So it's really hard for me to go to someone and say, hey, Charlie, can you write for me 52 times a year for free? Because I know you have a lot of spare time on your hands. And so what we did, particularly with the Apache column, and I think this is an example of our open hardware column, is we say, look, we're going to open up some publishing slots for these topics. Go sign up for them. And when my team's going to work with you to make sure we're making the deadlines and getting the content in and making the process as easy as possible. So this has worked really well. So this is kind of a collaborative approach to a traditional column, right? If you, in the newspaper world, like you have the weekly or daily column from someone, this is that same concept applied to community. And then we do speaker interview series. This is really awesome. We partner with a lot of different events. We've done events with Southern California Linux Expo, DrupalCon, and we did the DevNation speakers, some of the DevNation speakers here. And next month, we're going to be working on OSCON, which is the O'Reilly Open Source Conference. And then the next big one is Grace Hopper and All Things Open in the fall. So this is great. So what we do is we look at the agenda, we look at the topics, we look at the speakers, and we actually put a call out to our writers and ask them if they're interested in interviewing anyone. It's an interesting way for us to get great content. It's a great way for our community of writers to be introduced to some awesome open source people. And then it's also a way to promote that person's talk as well as the conference. So it's kind of a triple win for us. And we have a really short URL if you want to go check out the interviews for the DevNation speakers. Then there's SEO, search engine optimization. This is going to be a really interesting example of the daily heartbeat I told you about earlier. So SEO is constantly changing, right? And we were not as SEO savvy as we are now. So in May of 2012, Google updated their algorithm with the Panda update, and it negatively impacted our traffic, right? We weren't intentionally doing anything wrong, but Google thought we were. So we were literally doing over 1,000 page views a day from search traffic, and it was slashed to the low 100s, like 100, 200 page views a day. And it actually took us a while to figure out what was going on. I can actually look in the stats and tell you exactly on April 24th at 4 a.m. when they updated the algorithm. It's very clear. So this caused us to get an SEO audit completed on the site. We learned that Drupal 6 out of the box is not very SEO friendly. So we basically just had to correct some more of the technical stuff, right? The way that the pages were laid out on the back end, fixing some of the HTML and the structure. So that was kind of the big thing that we got hit with. We were already writing naturally. We were avoiding keyword stuffing. And we were writing about content that we have domain expertise in. So that's my advice. Lesson learned here is make sure that you understand your SEO and potentially have an SEO strategy if you're going to be publishing content. And then there's distribution. So we spend about half our time collecting content. We spend the other half of our time distributing content. And we do this in a variety of ways, right? Social media is an obvious one. We have a dedicated person that does that. As I mentioned, we're sending out stuff on Twitter, Facebook, Google+. We're leveraging platforms like YouTube. Reddit is a great source for us. We also send out a weekly newsletter email on every Tuesday at 6 a.m. We have about over 220,000 subscribers to that. So having that consistently go out, highlighting the best content of the week. Our strategy with our newsletter is to give our consumers the best content, right? We are not trying to push a certain piece of content. We look at our stats, we look at what did the best the last week, and we give them pretty much in rank order of the best content from the previous week. So to get a little bit more into social media, we schedule probably 90% of all of our stuff. So we're using tools like Sprout Social and Hootsuite to schedule social media. And we have to understand each platform too. So with things like Facebook and Google+, we're actually able to do like more long form content and with images and attachments and so forth to the articles. But with Twitter, we are not afraid to tweet the article out several times. And so typically what an article will look like if it was published today, we'll tweet it out at 9, 10, or 11, somewhere in that time frame. And then we'll also tweet something similar to that in the evening, 9, 10, or 11, again to hit another time zone, to hit kind of the East Coast, West Coast kind of mentality. And also, we don't just share our content. We're also looking for other open source news and happenings out there, which is why I like to describe it as a steady stream of open source goodness. And the interesting thing for us is that because a lot of our content, over half of our content is coming from someone not at Red Hat, it doesn't feel like we're pushing out like a lot of, it feels more natural to share the things that we publish on the site with our community. So before I talk about some of the programs we created, I'll pause here to see if there were any questions so far. I can take maybe 1 or 2 questions if there are any. Yeah?
Jason, I'm sorry if I missed this at the beginning. The content that authors contribute on opensource.com, maybe you talk a little bit about the license.
Sure. Yeah, great. So the question is, for the content on the site, what is the license? Our default license is Creative Commons BYSA, and we upgraded that to the 4.0 version, I think late last year. So Creative Commons, by attributions, share alike, we very rarely publish anything that's copyrighted. But if it is, and it's a good story, we want to get the story out there. So our default is Creative Commons. Good question. Okay, so we have a couple programs that have helped us build the community over the last 5.5 years. And let's get into it. So this is a little bit of how we view the community. It's not perfect. The triangle seems a good way, right? At the base, we have our 600,000 page views a day. We get, I think it's about 350,000 unique visitors each month. So we have our readers, our commenters, and our sharers, and we love all of them, and it's great to see that. We have our our one-time guest post, so people that come with one story and they may or may not come back. That's actually, for our team, that's a huge investment because it just takes time for them to understand our process and the back and forth that we have to deal with there. So where we'd like to spend most of our time is at the top of the triangle, where if we get a one-time contributor, can we get them to contribute more and make it, again, as easy as possible for them to contribute so they want to come back and share a new story or do a follow-up to their existing story. But where we spend most of our time is with our community moderators, and I've talk a lot about that here in a moment. But what I don't want to miss is we have a writers list that we started in August, and I think we have about 600 people subscribed to that list. So that's something that we use to communicate writing opportunities. So about every 2 weeks, we'll send out, hey, we have this upcoming speaker series, or we have the next theme of the month is this. If you're interested, please connect with us. And it's that constant reminder of the opportunity to publish content on our platform. So for me, this is probably the most important slide of the presentation. These are our community moderators. This is the heart and soul of our community. This is the foundation of our community. We have Alexander, Nicole, Robin, Luis, David, Marcus, Phil, Asim, Scott, Joshua, David, Don, Natish, and Jason. We invest a lot of our time in working with this amazing group of people. They do this for free. They're volunteers. They sign up for a 1-year commitment. And they are our eyes and ears out there. We have people from all over the world. I think Alexander is in Europe. We have a couple folks from Europe. Scott's from New Zealand. It's just great to have kind of a global feel for these moderators. But there are a few things I'd like to improve on this. So one of our goals this year is to have more moderators. But I'd like to have more diversity, right? I'd like to have more women involved in our community moderator program. And we'd like to be more international because we know there are things happening in other countries outside of North America, which we tend to kind of default to because that's where we live and work, our team, that is. And so we're always looking to expand this. So we have a couple other things that I'll talk through. How we celebrate our community, the points and badge system that we created, and then our community awards. And so this is how we evolved over time. The first year, our first anniversary, I think we wanted to celebrate, but we didn't want to pat ourselves on the back and say, hey, we made it a year, yay. I like to say, like, if you have children, we actually, when my son turned 1, we threw a birthday party for him. But it really wasn't about him. It was about us, like making it. Like we made it a year. It was amazing. So it was that same concept of we wanted to celebrate. And what's the right way to celebrate in open source is to celebrate your community. The next year, we deployed a points and badge system, and that was just a way for people to show some of their participation on the site. On the back end, we actually use that to identify potential community moderators. And then we have community awards that we started handing out, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So for the moderators, like this is a win-win, right? They're volunteering their time and contributing content, and we give them access to our platform and access to our network. And so they're really building their reputation. And in open source, we know that that's a critical part of why people participate is because it's very reputation-based. So they also kind of get rewarded. We bring all of them to Raleigh, North Carolina in the fall to go to the All Things Open conference. And we basically have usually a day before that, we'll bring them in for a full day strategy session where we can have an in-person meeting, talk about the future of the site, talk about how we can evolve the community, and then we give them a conference pass and let them go. And many of them are actually speakers at the conference, which is a kind of a nice bonus. So to talk about specifics on some of the other programs, on your left, this is an example of some of the awards that we give out. So every year we've been giving out I think since 2003-ish, no, 2013, I went way back in the decade, People's Choice Award. So we select probably 5 or 7 people that are doing some really great stuff in the open source community, and then we let our community vote on who the winner should be. We do things like the best interview of the year, the social sharer of the year. We kind of have fun with this. And again, we're celebrating our community because they do great things, and we want to take time to thank them. We also have, this is a listing kind of our points and badge system. And I alluded earlier that we use this on the back end to kind of help identify who's contributing. They actually don't get anything with the points. Like there's no, like you don't cash it in at the end and get a t-shirt or something. We're actually naturally handing out t-shirts and stuff to people as we go along. But a fun like tech thing that we do is on the spam side of things, we get a lot of people a lot of spammers, or I don't even know if they're people, they register with our site to try to get a URL on their user profile. And so that's called black hat SEO, so trying just to get a link on someone else's site. And so we actually prevent user profiles from being displayed unless they've earned 10 points. And the barrier to earn that 10 points is very easy. It's like go vote on something, comment on the site, and then your profile is exposed. So this is actually a great way to combat spammers. So I'm really proud of that because I think it's a cool idea. But anyway, so I think that was just kind of a side effect of deploying the badge system. All right, here's where it gets really fun. I'm going to take you through a whirlwind tour of all the different tools we use. And I would imagine that in everyone's day job, you probably have a variety of tools that you use as well. So this is what our quiver of tools looks like. I'm not going to go in depth on all of them, so I'm going to go on the left-hand side. I'll talk about each of those. But I mentioned earlier, we use Sprout Social and Hootsuite to do our social media management. We're using Sprout to schedule all of our social media. We were using Hootsuite, but Hootsuite limits you to do scheduling in increments of 5 minutes, and Sprout lets you do it to the minute. We use a lot of email. Unfortunately, I just can't get away from email as much as I want to, as much as I want to be Professor Small Jones from UNC, who does no email anymore. I can't do it. And we also use a lot of mailing lists. We have I mentioned the writers list. We have a specific list for our community moderators, and then we have a general opensource.com community list that's open for anyone to join and talk about the site. We are on IRC, so Internet Relay Chat. We have a channel there just to be there to talk with people if they want to do it that way. And then again, we're also leveraging a lot of social media. So I mentioned this earlier, but I've talked about Drupal. Drupal is an open source content management system. I often get asked a lot why we chose Drupal. So 6 years ago, when we were planning all this stuff out, it really came down to Drupal, WordPress, Plone, and Joomla. And if we just wanted a site to be a blog, we probably would have went with WordPress. But we wanted to build a platform, and so we chose Drupal. One of the main things, I don't know if we would be able to do things like our community calendar or the points and badge system if we were on something like WordPress. So Drupal gives us that flexibility to have a more robust platform. It does probably take a little bit higher technical skill set as far as managing some of this stuff. But for the users, the interface is pretty straightforward. And this is kind of a screenshot of the back-end administrator site. Then we have Omniture. So Omniture is very similar to Google Analytics. So the reason why we use Omniture is, again, we're kind of like a startup within Red Hat, but we get access to the mothership. So Red Hat uses Omniture stats, so we use Omniture stats. And we're actually using a lot of these statistics to make decisions for future publication, right? So we're pulling data from yesterday to make decisions about what we should publish in the future, what topics are hot, where we're having errors or where people are bailing on the site so we can improve on those type of things. This is a tool called Etherpad. I like to describe it as a lightweight Google Doc. We will often use this to work on something collaboratively. We actually were using this for our publishing calendar, but we actually had to, because we were publishing 20 articles a week, we actually outgrew the Etherpad and we moved it over to a Google Doc, which I'll show you in a moment. But this is great if you just need a couple people to work on something in real time. We love this tool. We actually will use this to kind of write the first version of any sort of documentation that we're doing within the team, and then we'll move it over to a different platform. So speaking of Google Docs, this is an example of one of the dashboards we've created. So these are all the stats that we track, and I just couldn't fit in. We have all this back to 2011. So I can look at a glance, kind of year over year, month over month, of some of the things we're looking at. How many articles we published, if they're by Red Hat, if they're by community moderator, if they're by the community, page views, unique visits, search traffic, referral traffic. We have all this at a glance because otherwise we have to go into Omniture and pull it out, so we just kind of make it handy for us here. We use Google Docs for lots of different things, particularly more on the community-facing stuff so that we can work with our community moderators and work with folks on our columns and things like that. This is an internal tool at Red Hat we use. We call it Mojo. It's a tool from Jive Software. And again, this is kind of where most of our documentation ends up. So if we start something in Etherpad, it usually ends up here. And one of the points I like to make here is we document everything. So just about every single process that we have, from creating our weekly newsletter, is documented, step by step. Do this, here's the template, fill this in, go grab this special URL, and everything is documented. And I'm a really big pusher for that on my team. It's not that I don't trust my team to do their job. It's just I need to have backup people, so if someone goes on vacation, they can do the job, and it's fully documented, and there's no question about it. And so my team loves to hate me when I say, you need to document that. It's saved us many, many times. So documentation is your friend. This is a tool called Moz. It was formerly known as SEO Moz. We use this to track our keyword rankings. It does a weekly crawl on the site, and it gives us a report on any site errors. This is not a free tool. This is, I think it's about $100 a month. But it's great for us because what I'll show you in a few minutes, SEO is really important for our content strategy. All right, so that was the whirlwind tour of some of our tools. I wanted to show you some of the results, and then we're going to wrap up with kind of lessons learned. So 60% of our content comes from the open source community. I'd like this number to be 75%, but we're getting there. It was last year we averaged around 50%. We've gotten as high as 65% this year. But I think this is amazing. 60% of everything published on opensource.com comes from someone that does not work at Red Hat. This is a huge goal for us because we don't want to talk a whole bunch about Red Hat. We want to talk about what's happening in open source and share some of those success stories happening around the world. This is our referral traffic. Over 50% of our traffic comes from search. So this is why SEO is really important to us. We don't have someone coming to our homepage and clicking on a link and going to a new story. They're searching for something, and we happen to be the place that they land, which is awesome. And then you also notice the light blue sliver is our social media. So we have about 10 to 15% of our traffic coming from social media, which is great. So we're happy to invest in basically a full-time person to work on social media and content distribution, and this is a great result for us. And so I mentioned the SEO audit before. It really paid off. So we track certain keywords. It's really hard to see on the screen, I'm sorry. But if you type in what is open source, we are, depending on your variations of Google and how they want to filter it for you, we should be close to number one. And we actually, our strategy for SEO, and this is actually how the what is open source page came to be about. We saw that people were searching for the word open source, coming to our site, and then bouncing. And in the web world, that means they were leaving very quickly. So coming to our page and not getting what they want, and then going back to Google looking for something else. So we said, well, why don't we create a page that describes what open source is? Sounds really intuitive, but it didn't exist. So we created it, and we decreased the bounce rate. We improved the content, and now we have a very high ranking in that. So we actually use this to drive some of our content strategy on our evergreen content. So we are looking up certain keywords that we think we could gain some traction in, and we write content for it. So Arduino is a really hot topic. There's a lot of searches for Arduino. So what did we do? We created a What is Arduino page, and we published it. We've learned that there's about a 6-month gap in order to actually start to get traction on SEO, just because there's usually existing content out there. So we try really hard to publish at least one new resource a month, and we know that we are probably not going to see if it paid off until about 3 to 6 months later. So that's just something that we learned that I am sharing with you today. And then this is probably my second favorite slide. This is our traffic since day one. And you can see it was pretty steady for a number of years, and then something magical happened. In May of 2013, This is kind of like a triple play for us. We had just launched our community moderator program that February, so we're starting to see some of the benefits of those contributions coming in. We got back on Google's good side, so a new algorithm came out, and we were now friendly with Google. And then we also got put in Google News, which has really helped to get some of our more recent content out in front of people kind of at a faster pace. And I'm hoping this is our hockey stick moment. So if you do any sort of like web analytics, the hockey stick moment is when your traffic just kind of starts to accelerate, and hopefully it's uncontrollably accelerating. But we're on pace. Our goal is to hit 1 million page views a month, and we're going to do that by creating good content and continuing to build community. So for me, community is everything, right? And we're always looking for the next contributor. We're always looking for the next community moderator. But finding these people is really hard because everyone's really busy. And we're dealing with the normal limitations, right? Time, money, resources. So my advice is, if you are doing something similar to this, is to invest in your community advocates and to invest in the programs that will invest in them. So I think we're fulfilling our mission to be the world's premier open source storytelling platform. We continue to have executive support from Red Hat. So from the very beginning, Jim Whitehurst has been very supportive of this. It continues to be it to this day. He actually mentioned it in his book. So kind of without spoiling the book, the last page of the book basically says, go continue this conversation on opensource.com. So he's thoughtful in doing that. And I basically just want to wrap up here with a few lessons learned and kind of what the future looks like for us. And then we'll do some questions. So I mentioned it before, but content is king. We are not, although we are interested in quantity, we are very interested in quality, right? The quality of our content has drastically improved over the years. And that's just us learning and us getting better authors on the site. I said it before, but on the SEO side, like, know your platform, know if it's good with SEO out of the box, and consider having an SEO strategy in place before you start, or get one soon. My favorite one is, like, find your stars and let them shine. Find the people who are going to be key contributors, give them the parameters, and let them go and support them along the way. I've gotten a lot of great feedback that our site design is really simple. It's really easy to read. So we are an ad-free site. We continue to be ad-free. Red Hat is investing in that, and we don't run ads. So we don't have those crazy pop-ups telling you to buy something and that you don't need anyway. And then the lean startup book, the practicing lean methodology has really kind of changed the way that my team operates. And again, the key lesson there is, like, if you're going to do something new, have a vision of what success looks like, because that's really important. You need to know, if you're going to do something, you need to be able to kill it if it's not working. If our YouTube video wasn't doing as well as it has, we would have killed it and then gone into something else. We have a long list of things that we could do. It's just finding the time to do it, getting more efficient at what we're doing now so that we can move on to some of those other items on the list. So what does the future look like? We want more community moderators. Again, we want some more diversity and inclusiveness there. We continue to expand our strategic content. So again, I mentioned things like hot topics, themed months, collaborative columns. We're always looking for ways to kind of create a steady stream of content coming in. We're at a point now where we are actually planning content out for the next kind of 1 to 2 weeks. If you would have talked to me 2 years ago, we might not even know what we're publishing the next day, right? So we've moved from, man, what are we publishing the next day, to, man, what are we doing, like, for the next 2 weeks? Like, and do we need to move stuff around? Like, that's a good problem for us to have. In the early days of opensource.com, my manager literally would walk around with a piece of paper and be like, what are you publishing today, Jason? Or what are you writing for me tomorrow? And it was just kind of that situation. We've evolved from notebook to Etherpad to having more robust systems and tools. And then we're also working really hard to optimize for mobile and responsive. So we're not web developers. We are community builders. And so we partner with Acquia to do a lot of our web development. So we tend to focus more on content and community than on web development. So that's what the future looks like a little bit. So I hope that talking through some of the tools and methodology and things have given you an idea of kind of what we do on a day-to-day basis, so that you can take that back to your organization and hopefully improve on some of those things. what I want to leave you with is to define your community, build your community, and nurture it, right? For me, I think community building is the future of marketing and the future of content marketing. We just do it in an open source way because we involve our community with it. And again, invest in your programs and find your advocates, and thank you very much.